Icon founder, Icon founder and program advisor. There are also 2 breakout sessions to engage with colleagues that have joined the event around practice. The presentation elements of the event are being recorded today to ensure that colleagues unable to attend can still access the learning from the event. Please can we ask colleagues to remain on mute during the presentation elements of the event to prevent background noise. Feel free to use the chat function, which will be being monitored, and hopefully any points can be addressed at various times through the event. Next slide, please, Nat. Before we move on to any content, we wanted to begin with a self-care reminder. When we discuss harm to babies, this can have an impact or be triggering at any point due to our professional or lived experience. Please step away if you find the event is having an impact on you, and remember your circle of supports to support self-care. I'd now like to begin by introducing Detective Chief Inspector Christina Windsor from Avon Somerset Police to open the event. Thank you very much, Chris.
Hi and good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see so many people online. And actually, I'd like to say it's a real honour to be asked to open the event, so a massive thank you. I took quite a lot of time to actually think about what can I say this morning to open it, and I felt a bit of a personal responsibility. And I was chatting with Nat, who's facilitated a lot of this, and said, actually, I've got a lot of reflections professionally and personally that I wanted to share with you all around why the ICON approach is so important. From a professional and police point of view, incidents of abusive head trauma have a massive effect on the child, on the family, and on all professionals that respond and investigate these events, as well as the entire community. For me, it's a real constant source of worry on so many levels, and I see the impact daily. I really worry about the welfare impact on all of the agencies that have to intervene and investigate these tragic incidents and the impact it has on the trauma of every single person that's involved. For our communities, it really is unthinkable. And for me, the impact is vast and wide-reaching. But I think what this really made me reflect on is personally as a parent, and I wanted to share a story with you as to why the importance of the ICON approach resonates so strongly with me. So both of my children have got quite a complex and rare medical condition, which wasn't diagnosed. They were a little bit older, and it meant that when my son was little, he had kind of colic, crying type symptoms when he was really small. And I think I look back on that time and it was really, really tricky and really, really difficult. And I was offered some support, but I know that my husband didn't get that, despite him being kind of the primary carer. And often when I'd had enough and walking out the room, it would be my husband that I'd be relying on to try and take that up. And actually, I reflect back and think how difficult and tricky it must have really been for him. And I remember, and I will always remember this, and this man will never know how important he was to me, and I wish I could share it with him. But I remember one day, I think my hair was everywhere, my clothes, I'm not convinced I'd changed them, and I don't know how many days. And I remember a delivery driver knocking on the door, and I must have looked the right fright. And I came to the door and I opened it, and my son was just constantly crying. And I remember him just taking my arm and saying to me, do you know what? It's okay. They all cry. It's all right. They will stop eventually, and he will eventually sleep. And the way that he made me feel just in that message was it still resonates with me today. And he showed me a kind of few different ways to comfort him. And to be poor bless him, he came back afterwards with a coffee. I really must have looked to check I was all right. But actually, he had a massive impact on me forever, because, for me, it was the simplicity of the message that he shared with me that resonates and really clearly is reflective of the ICON message that infant crying is normal. Comforting methods can help. It is okay to walk away and never shake a baby. We need to do everything we can to intervene early and stop the avoidable abuse of non-accidental injuries and head trauma to children. And the ICON approach for me is absolutely massive. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful time in this half day. The agenda looks absolutely fantastic. And for me, I just hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you for inviting me to open this morning.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciate you sharing from a professional and that kind of vulnerable personal perspective. Karen, I think I'm handing over to you just to introduce our keynote speaker, and I'll move on to the next slide if that's okay, please. Thanks for your time, Chris.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd like to introduce now our keynote speaker, Dr. Suzanne Smith, who's the ICON founder and programme advisor. We're really delighted to have you here this morning, Sue.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for inviting us. May and I, this is a really special event for May and I, and I'll leave May to explain why. But it's been a long time coming, and we're thrilled to bits that ICON is in this area now, in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. And thank you, Chris, so much for your
Sue, I think your microphone's on mute.
Yeah. Tell me when you can hear me.
We can now, thank you.
Brilliant. Sorry, it's that headset that lets me down. I can't get over Chris's opening address. It was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Chris. And that delivery driver, I want to meet him, please, now. Where is he? And you're right, Chris, this is what ICON is about. It's a simple message that hopefully will bring that same sense of calm and hope and light at the end of the tunnel for parents who are struggling with a baby that's crying. So if we can go on to the next slide then, please, Nat, and the next one. So what is abusive head trauma? A lot of you will already know this. It's used to be called shaken baby syndrome. And in a nutshell, it's child abuse that causes these catastrophic injuries, brain injuries, eye injuries, bony injuries, and they have a huge impact on the baby. If the baby survives, there is a strong likelihood that they won't survive past the age of 21. Such are the seriousness of the injuries. The causal mechanism is rarely confirmed, but it's something to do with acceleration and deceleration of the brain moving inside the head, and it can be with or without any sort of impact. So the incidence in the UK, we talk about 24 per 100,000. Globally, we're thinking that's more like 35 per 100,000, and the research on that's changing all the time. If we can move on to the next one, please. Nat, thanks. So the cost, how much does it cost? I'm not going to spend a long time on this because Ellis's story that you're going to watch at the end of my presentation tells you how much it costs from both an emotional point of view and also from a medical cost and social care cost point of view. So I'm not going to spend loads of time on that. The thing is that we need to think about other costs that we don't necessarily see are the serious case review costs. Now, I've put £75,000 there. That was from 2015 when we actually sat down and worked out how much a serious case review, as they were called then, child safeguarding practice review as they're called now, cost. It's likely to be more than that now. And there's also the loss of societal productivity that obviously losing that individual brings to us as well. So the next slide, please. Who shakes and why? This doesn't change. And there's been lots of recent research. I've quoted stuff there from 2008, 2010, but 2020, even more recently than that, 21, it's still 70% of the perpetrators, around about 70%, are men. Usually fathers, male surrogates, carers. It's not necessarily step parent that we used to think. It's often the biological father as well. So I've put down there some risk factors, and I do this with caution, really, because there's financial hardship, low birth weight, prior knowledge of child protection services, which is a strong risk factor in young parents. But that doesn't mean those are the only people who will shake a baby. And anybody in any society and any part of the social strata will be able to, stands a risk of not being able to cope with a baby crying, and they cross that line. And people, right, I'm just seeing things flashing up about the slides. It looks like most people can see them. That's good. So what caregivers themselves describe when they have a baby who is crying and they're struggling to cope with it is they describe it in very dramatic terms as living on the edge, you know, feeling like they're on a cliff edge, on the verge of completely losing control. And some of them do, and some of them shake the baby. And when they shake the baby stops crying. When it happens again, they might shake the baby more readily, knowing that the crying will stop. And sometimes we'll see on CT scans that babies haven't been shaken just once, they've been shaken more than once. So if we can push on to the next slide, please. There's also something there about the links to ACEs, adverse childhood events, and the more ACEs there are in someone's life, the more likely they are to accept potentially harmful parenting behaviours. So let's look at shaking and crying then. So there's agreement across the board that that there is a link between shaking and crying, that people shake the baby because they can't cope with the crying. That's not absolutely every baby that's shaking, but it is in a lot of cases. And we look at this in terms of Ronald Barr's work, who has done so much about this topic. And we look at this normal crying curve. And this is a bit of a revelation to lots of parents and to lots of professionals as well. You can see that the normal curve of infant crying, the crying starts to increase around about 2 weeks. It reaches a peak somewhere around 6, 8, 9 weeks, and then it gradually starts to subside, so that by 4 or 5 months, there's a more normal pattern of crying. But there is that peak in crying that everybody recognizes. And when you do recognize it and you think about your baby, or you think in the past about your baby, you think that was normal. And there was me beating myself up there that I was a rubbish parent and I was missing something and I wasn't doing something right. And actually, it was just normal. You can see how some babies will cry for 5 to 6 hours in a 24-hour period, which is a heck of a lot, and how that can drain people. And parents, and you know yourselves with your own children, and those of you who don't have children, you know just what it's like sat on a bus or on a train or on a plane with a baby that cries a lot. It's designed to get to you. Next slide, please. So again, I'm not going to spend ages on these slides because you will have a copy of the slides, but there is a huge amount of research that shows that the sort of programs that have inspired ICON work, and that they reduce the incidence of abusive head trauma in babies. Next slide, please. And again, that is showing that that reduction makes a difference, not only to the incidence of abusive head trauma, but to the attendance at A&E with babies that are crying for no other reason than they're just crying. I think somebody's got their mute off, and I can hear some clattering in the kitchen or something. It might be helpful if that person turns their mute on. So next slide, please. I just want to draw your attention to this one. This is a Take 5 safety plan. And this was from a 2020 piece of research. And this really focuses on what the O in ICON stands for, that it's okay to walk away. And on just that element, the study found that those who received the programme were 79% less likely to have been diagnosed with abusive head trauma. Next slide, please. So abusive head trauma isn't inevitable. Some of it, not all of it, but some of it can be prevented. And that's what public health is all about, taking that multi-sectorial, multifactorial public health approach to address the risk factors. There is a very, very compelling financial argument to invest in these sort of programs. So all of this came from a lifelong interest in this, really career-long interest in this for me. I'm a nurse, I'm a health visitor. I was a named nurse for child protection in Leeds teaching hospitals, and who had a paediatric intensive care unit where most of the babies who were shaken were brought. And saw firsthand the absolute devastation that this caused. And with me being a health visitor as well, and steeped in public health, I wanted to prevent it. So from that time, which was in the 1990s, I have concentrated on looking at how we can do that. And I ended up going on to getting a Winston Churchill Travel Memorial Trust Travel Fellowship, and went to Canada, America, and saw all the programs that I'd been looking at and reading about. And I literally took what I thought were the best bits and wove them together in something that I thought would fit with the UK health service delivery model. And so that's what ICON is, that's what it's come from. And it comprises a series of touch points, and you can combine other message with this as well. So if we go to the next slide, then that's it. That's what ICON is. And Chris helpfully introduced this as she opened this conference today. And I just want to step through it again. So infant crying is normal, and it will stop, just like that delivery driver said. And it talks about the normal curve of crying. And then the C is about comfort methods can help, and gives parents some ideas about what to think about, how the things you might want to check, and to the sort of calming techniques you can try. And we have an infographic on the website that goes into this in far more detail. It's okay to walk away. We emphasize that this is when you've checked the baby is safe, the crying is getting to you, and it's not about leaving them there for hours. We say after a few minutes, when you're feeling calmer, go back and check on the baby. Don't handle the baby when you are wound up to the hilt and you feel like you could smash something through a window. Don't handle a baby when you're feeling like that. And then the N is never ever shake or hurt a baby. And for all the reasons we know about causing lasting brain damage and actually killing babies. We also say to people, you know, if you're worried your baby's unwell, don't just wait, you know, think it's okay, it's normal. If you think they're unwell, do contact your GP and do contact NHS 111. And if you're concerned that they're very unwell, yes, take them to A&E. We're not saying don't do your normal checks, but actually, if there is no apparent reason for the baby crying in terms of illness or them been anything wrong with them, then it's normal. You can satisfy yourself with that information. Next slide, please. So let's briefly trot through the touch points. What are they? First thing to say is these touch points are a core, but every area has a different sort of wraparound, which I'll go and show you later. And this is a core that is delivered principally by health teams, but there is so much more that other teams can do. And I'm thinking of social care, I'm thinking of the police, and I'm thinking of housing. Housing see a heck of a lot when they actually go into houses, obviously, where families are, especially where there's a baby. So it applies to every agency who has any contact with families. So the core touch points of this. So the first one is at home, at home or in hospital, depending where the baby is delivered, immediately before discharge back to the community after the baby's been born. And that we say that is an absolute must, because that is the time when most men are present. After this time, the contact with men drops off massively. And I know that Jess is going to cover later on the myth of hidden men. But this is the one that is absolutely a must do. So capturing this with midwives, capturing both parents at this point to go through the icon message is really important. And it's as simple as you give them a leaflet, and you don't just give them the leaflet, you don't just stick it in that discharge bag and wave them bye-bye. You go through it with them. We've got a bit of a script to help you get the conversation started, but in reality, most midwives, this comes really, really naturally to them, and they wrap it up with the safe sleep message as well. So that is the first touch point. Next slide, please. The next one is within the first 10 days. So the community midwife will be visiting at least up to 10 days. And we ask that the midwife simply just puts in a very light touch reminder, sort of saying, so, you know, baby's coming up to 2 weeks. Do you remember that icon leaflet you were given in the hospital? Do you want to dig it out? Do you want to remind yourself about it? Because you know the crying is going to start to increase if it hasn't already. And it's literally that. No script, no big intervention. They're there anyway. It's a light touch reminder. Between 10 and 14 days, the health visitor will go. And again, it's another light touch reminder, and perhaps a conversation about comforting techniques. You know, what have you been using? What have you been finding helpful as comforting techniques? What did you use with the other children if they have any? And it's always a good point to say, you know, whatever comforting techniques you use, what will work one day might not work another day. That doesn't mean it's you. That's just how it is with babies of this age. 3 weeks is a challenging contact because it's not a part of the Healthy Child programme, but a lot of areas are finding innovative ways to reach out to both parents. So if you get the mobile phones of both parents, a lot of areas are sending a text to remind parents at this age that the crying is likely to start reaching a peak. We say it reaches a peak about 6 to 8 weeks. It'll be ramping up now. And it's just a reminder about, you know, do you need a plan? We have a really nice crying plan. Have you filled one in? Do you want to have a little look at that and remind yourself about how you said you were going to cope with this crying that we told you would happen? And then at 6 to 8 weeks, we've got the GP check, the normal 6 to 8 week check, GP and health visitor check. And we ask that the GP at this point go through a questionnaire, which GPs really, really like. It's available on EMIS and System 1, as is the leaflet, and they can code that they've delivered this message as well. So you've got different professionals there giving the message. And this is really important because you could say, well, actually, the health visitor could just do all of this. But the public health research shows that different professionals giving the same message has a bigger impact than one professional giving it. It's like different points, different times, drip, drip, just reminds professional parents about the importance of this message. Okay, next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this because I know Jessie's going to go through this and she's going to talk about the myth of invisible men. All I want to say is, in your area, it is absolutely crucial that you think about how you reach men. How are you doing it? And I'll just share this really briefly, that I know that when I'm talking to professionals who have started ICON, their conversation very quickly becomes one about mums, really, really quickly, which isn't a fault, you know, it's not a criticism, but we need to also be thinking about how we reach in men with this message, because it is more likely that it's going to be the man who shakes the baby. And how are we saying to our mums, are you talking to dads about this? How are we reaching dads? And if DadPad is a way of doing that, absolutely brilliant. And I know Julian will talk to you later about that. Next slide, please. And so this is the myth of invisible men underpins or reiterates the research that underpinned ICON, which is my own research that I did for my PhD. And that's where a dad was sort of saying he was desperate for somebody to say more than, "You all right?" Because that's what he got when the professionals visited. "Are you all right?" Which wasn't an invitation for him to say, "No, there is something wrong. Yes, I need your support." So let's move on. So wrapping around those touch points are perhaps you want to introduce an antenatal message. A lot of areas do, but there's also a social media presence that is growing and has been growing a lot since April 2020. And we are focusing on engagement with men's groups. DadPad will share our stuff. We share DadPad stuff. So we're doing that kind of collaborative thing, knowing that that's more likely to be able to reach more men. We have a men's group that Sue Anslow, our program manager, runs to make sure that we are doing everything we can. But we know that social media will reach a lot of men, and our videos are designed to be sat on social media and watched, and we know that they do watch it, a lot of them, and we have good engagement through that route, but there's always room for more. Next slide, please. This is a quick one to remind everybody that NHS 111, if you ring NHS 111 with a crying baby, and if you ring with a mental health problem and you have been found to have a new baby in the house, you will be offered the icon advice as well, which is absolutely brilliant. A huge amount of work went into getting that into NHS 111. Next slide, please. We have 2 leaflets. We have our standard leaflet, and then we have one just for premature babies, because the premature babies don't cry when they're 2 weeks old, and they're probably still in a neonatal unit. They start to cry more 2 weeks after the date they were due to be born. And usually parents are at home then. They will have left the security of a neonatal unit. So this leaflet has been designed at James Cook University Hospitals Trust by a professor of neonatology there, Jonathan Wiley, who and his team to speak directly to those parents who have had a premature baby. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend ages on this because we're a bit late starting, so we're running out of time, but I'll let you have a read of some of the evaluations that have been done. Just to say that there is a national evaluation ongoing at the moment. It's just started. It'll probably be another 18 months before it reports, but these local areas also do some evaluation. And the one from Hampshire was the first one to be done when they launched in 2018, and it upped hugely the number of GPs who routinely asked about crying. And it talks about how health visitors and midwives found it so easy to incorporate this into their daily work because it's simple and it's short and you don't need a lot of training. Next slide, please. And also the parents and professionals felt confident that they would be able to share the advice with people who was caring for the baby as well. Next slide, please. We've also had, and the impact was during the time frame of their research, they had 5 cases of shaken babies, but in all of the cases, the maternity care was not provided within that area, and they weren't given the icon message at the immediate hospital and community midwifery phase, which shows how important it is that that message is given at that stage. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip over some of these slides because we're short on time. I just wanted to pull out what a parent said there. I have used the mantra, babies cry, I can cope myself, when baby has cried. It has gone round my head and it's helped. It's like a mantra. Babies cry, I can cope, babies cry. So that was from Manchester. Next slide, please. The Manchester slide also showed how much it cost, which was they only gave 2 leaflets. They didn't, you can put as much into this as you like, and that cost 16p per birth, which is, you know, if it saves 1 baby's life, that is a massive saving. Sussex also did an evaluation. And again, a huge number said that they'd received it. And the case study material here was so powerful. A young mum in foster care took her crying plan on the wall. She was so determined she was going to get this right. That crying plan was stuck on her wall. And the dad suffering with stress and anxiety, he was worried how he would cope with crying, found this advice easy to follow, and he felt relieved that because he was given permission to talk about his fears without being judged. Next slide, please.
Hello.
You doing the same one as me?
What you on about?
Sorry, has somebody got there?
Can everybody remain on mute, please, for the presentation? I'd really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Bottom left button, if people aren't aware of where it is.
Thanks. Cheers. Next slide, please. So, oh yeah, here we are. Responses of different areas. Loads of different areas have loads of different things that they do. And again, we've had BBC on the TV, on the radio, local radio. We've had brilliant radio adverts, which are translated into different languages that are pertinent to that area. We've had some fantastic radio adverts that have just been done for Barnsley, and we're going to listen to some of those later on in our meeting after this conference. So loads of stuff, videos, films, animations. If you go on Icon website, you'll see them. We have red book inserts that are available, banners, displays, loads of stuff. The world's your oyster. You can be as creative as you want to be. And the next few slides show how creative people have been. So the next slide shows you how people have done 7-point briefings, how they've done during COVID. They did a video of the midwife giving the Icon message. We've had them on, next slide please, on fire appliances. We've had them on refuse wagons, on buses, on billboards. Bernardo's train all of the people who visit families how to deliver the Icon message, which is brilliant. Next slide, please. And this shows you how creative you can be. So these are a series of posters in Durham. We do have branding guidelines, and so these follow the branding guidelines. And as long as you follow the branding guidelines, you can actually go put your own style on it, put your own stamp on it. These aren't ours, but you can get them if you want them, or you can just do your own, or you can just use those that are already done. So if you want a parents group, you could get the parents to design this as well, as long as you don't stray from that message, the essential core message. And some people have strayed, I've got to tell you. Some people have tried to change what the I stands for and what the O stands for. So all of these come through a bit of an approval process, which is me. And I'm very quick. I don't say it long before I give you the nod. Okay, next slide, please. We have easy read versions of our leaflets for people who have learning disabilities, and these have been through a user group of people with learning disabilities to check their integrity, and we got a big thumbs up from that group, which is brilliant. Next slide, please. Oh, translation. Okay, so we're not an organisation, so we don't have a big warehouse with thousands of leaflets in millions of different languages. If you want your leaflets translated into a different language, then you can contact our preferred print providers, Harlow Printing, and that they're available on the website. And they'll give you a quote for how much it will cost. And the more people who do that, obviously, the less expensive it is, because they've already got them in so many languages now. But apart from that, you will still have to have an interpreter if you can't speak the language yourself to go through this information, because as I said earlier, it's not about just giving a leaflet. We also have Reach Deck. Now, this is signified by a little orange disc with a white sort of stick figure in the middle of it on our website front page. And with that, you can translate whatever text you show on your computer. You can get any text you want up on there, highlight it and translate it by selecting which language you want to translate it into. This is an example of how I've translated something into Turkish. Took a screenshot of it and sent it to a parent who was really grateful for that. It also reads out the information out loud. So if you really can't get an interpreter, obviously that's the ideal, you can play it over your computer or over your device or over their phone. You can ask them to do it on their own phone. And and it will translate it into their language for you. So that is a really good facility that we have available on our website. Next slide, please. Those are the infographics I was talking about. It goes into more detail about infant crying being normal, and it goes into more detail about different comfort methods, also about when you should worry about a baby's crying. And the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health kindly allowed us to use their when to be worried, how to check a temperature and all the rest of it, and signs of meningitis, and that's included on there as well. Next slide, please. This is another example of different areas doing their own thing and making it applicable to their area. So we, SAFA, who lead the health in the armed forces, via the Ministry of Defence, have produced their own leaflets showing, obviously, uniformed personnel with crying babies, which is really good. Next slide, please. We have an icon in schools as well. It was always part of my plan to be able to deliver this message to children in high school just before they finish. So this is for between 14 and 16-year-olds. And again, Sue Anslow, our programme manager, has done a brilliant piece of work with a teacher who works in Fleetwood in Lancashire, and has produced a lesson plan, handout materials, everything, workbooks, the lot, for to be used in PHSE lessons for 14 to 16-year-olds. And that's available for those who, well, they'll be available to you. Next slide, please. This is an out-of-date map now. There's the green shows the area where we've reached. We've gone further than that, obviously. You're not on here. We are spreading throughout the country really, really effectively. And the beauty of that is that where people move about, they're going to get the same message. And where it's the same message that's delivered, there's more chance that people are going to hear it, understand it, and where hopefully abide by it. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to talk to you about our icon ambassadors. We have parents who have lived experience of abusive head trauma, and they are fundamental to ICON. They set ICON off. They approved ICON, the word ICON and what it stood for. And May is with us today, May Pladel Pierce, to talk about her son. She's there in the bottom left of the picture with Ellis. And she will tell you how much ICON means to her. Next slide, please. So that's my bit done. I'm now going to ask you to watch Ellis's story before I hand over to May.
I'm here today to tell you Ellis's story. I am his mum. Ellis was born healthy on Valentine's Day, 1995. On the 27th of May, when he was just 3 months old, he was shaken by my ex-partner. He had been caring for him when I nipped out. When I came back an hour later, there was an ambulance outside, still flashing its blue lights. To my horror, my baby Ellis was inside, being resuscitated. He was blue. I didn't know then that my ex-partner had shaken him. The 2-mile inner city drive to the hospital took 6 minutes. I remember equipment falling off shelves in the ambulance as we went round corners. When we arrived at the hospital, the paramedic ran in clutching Ellis, where there were 6 medical professionals waiting in resuscitation. I wasn't allowed in. They worked on him for hours. All the time, my ex-partner held my hand, repeating over and over, he just stopped breathing. I was numb with shock. A doctor came to tell me that Ellis had sustained severe brain damage. and asked, could they stop trying? But I did not know what that meant back then, and I just wanted him to live. 5 days on life support in an induced coma, Ellis miraculously survived. During this surreal nightmare, the CID arrived and I was interviewed over and over. I still did not know what had happened. 3 weeks into my son's admission, where my ex-partner had been there with me, he was charged with grievous bodily harm. He was escorted from the ward by police. It was only then that I was told of Ellis's injuries. His brain was so damaged it was like mush, I was told. He had detached retinas in both eyes, had 2 breaks in his tibia and 3 broken ribs. He was unresponsive. They told me that Ellis's injuries met the triad of injuries consistent with being shaken. His injuries were so severe, Ellis would have stopped breathing immediately whilst in my ex-partner's care. I was told by police that this vital information was paramount to charging my ex-partner. My whole world tilted. Every part of my life was no longer okay. I was on my own. My baby was no longer the Ellis I gave birth to. I felt a heavy grief shroud me and weigh down around my neck. I was told Ellis wouldn't make his first birthday. I can remember case conferences, social services, at-risk registers, being discharged with a huge bag of medication with a very poorly baby. I remember feeling frightened and overwhelmed. I remember feeling burdened by this great weighted necklace. I remember my ex-partner's family being abusive and switching from being at the hospital and being in the police station. I remember how different my baby looked. He was like a doll. No movement, no recognition, no response, just screaming. My friends and family didn't know how to react, so I had little support. I remember getting no support from anyone. I felt alone. In court, I heard specialists say that Ellis's injuries were compared to being dropped from a 7th-storey window or being in a car accident at 70 miles per hour unrestrained. This process was heavy beads on my burden necklace, and again, I had no emotional support. My ex-partner received a 2-year sentence. He served just 12 months and was free. I never really knew what happened. All night and all day, Ellis screamed for almost 19 months due to cerebral irritation. Ellis had 28 professionals in his life, coordinating the appointments, constantly lobbying for the equipment that we needed, and being assessed for help there were no resources for, was exhausting. The personal physical nursing care that Ellis required, coupled with everything else, gave me little time to be mum or even May. Ellis couldn't move, see, sit or talk. He needed suctioning and hoisting. After 3 years with a nasal gastric tube, he had a gastrostomy where all his nutritional feeds and medication went through a hole in his tummy. After many more operations to replace it every time it came out, I was trained to replace it myself. Ellis had 9 specialist wheelchair plus motors, gaiters and splints. He had standing support, ceiling hoists, electrical hospital beds, feeding pumps, suction machines, incontinence pads, pressure mattresses. Ellis had neck supports, specialist wheelchair adapted vehicles, specially adapted bedroom and bathrooms, widened doors. The list is endless. In the last 2 years, Ellis had an oxygen generator with backup cylinders, SATS monitor, heart monitor, advanced intercom system, and palliative nursing. His bedroom was like an ICU unit, and I was trained to use it all. He didn't leave the house unless to go to Charlton Farm Hospice for respite. Ellis had 284 hospital admissions. Many were due to pneumonia and chest infections. 5 were in intensive care on life support. The respirator wheezing and the little accordion gadget inside flopping up and down added many more beads on my necklace of trauma. His longest admission was 17 weeks. I considered suicide twice and was admitted to hospital myself. These were times when the stress became too unbearable. Sitting looking at your child with tubes everywhere, not waking for weeks, caused me to seek a way out. It was heartbreaking and lonely. My only friends were the children's ward staff or other mums on the wards. But in the end, even though I wanted out of this enduring and horrific situation, I had to go on as Ellis was dependent on me. Ellis had many procedures and operations on his eyes, removing fluid from his lungs, having a gastrostomy, having his tummy twisted shut, having his tendons in his legs cut and reset, and lumbar punctures. His lungs always collapsed following a general anaesthetic. He had his gums lasered out because of the side effect of medication and teeth removed. I sat astride Ellis resuscitating him at home so frequently whilst waiting for ambulances that to have had an emotional attachment in those moments would have broken me, and Ellis would have died before the ambulance arrived. I became the critical response team, where my emotional attachment as mum had to be ignored. No matter how tired I was, I had to be alert enough to triage whether Ellis needed to be in hospital or not. Giving love to my child and becoming emotionally detached when faced with crisis was an art form in itself, especially when these episodes became more frequent. These invisible beads were beginning to take their toll. Backache, migraines, and sciatica were now common for my once able self. His emergency ambulance admissions were so frequent due to his struggle to breathe that it became normal for me to radio into the hospital with his vitals whilst the ambulance crew resuscitated him. Ellis should have been playing, running, laughing, making friends and sharing, learning, being a child. He couldn't even lift a finger or make a request, read a book, or do imaginary play. Ellis was robbed of having a personality or feeling proud. Ellis was not a child. He had no sense of wonder and did not own an identity, nor did he make friends. He did not have the basic rights of all children. He was not free. Ellis had 24 different medications a day, some up to 4 times a day. We had a complex spreadsheet for it. He never called me mum. When Ellis was 12, he was assessed as reaching his end-of-life period. His brain had reduced to only 1/3. His immune system was shutting down. He struggled to breathe and increased emergency admissions were evidence of that. The consultant advised us to write up a legal document that limited the procedures to prolong his life and suffering, like resuscitation and antibiotics. Giving my permission to let Ellis go was heartbreaking, because I was giving up on the chance that one day he would be okay. The realisation that this would only end when Ellis died was demoralising and went against all that I had done for so long. More beads, crippling backache. He was dependent on oxygen and incredibly poorly for 18 months. In that period, his then 4-year-old brother would sneak into his room, lower his electric bed remotely, and climb in next to him and go to sleep. I would hear it on the intercom monitor. His little brother knew that we were going to lose him, even though no words were spoken of it. This was one of the biggest beads to thread. At Charlton Farm Hospice in Bristol, Ellis passed away of pneumonia on the 9th of May 2009, aged just 14. We chose to use the non-resuscitation document. We chose to let him go. We held his hand as he took his last breath. Something died inside me in that moment. I had no more room on my necklace for beads. It was full, and I am shackled by it. At Ellis's funeral, a gospel choir of 100 sang, a fitting tribute to a young lad whose only joy was music. At the coroner's hearing, it was determined that Ellis had died as a direct result of being shaken, but his injuries were sustained before the law changed, so there was no secondary charge of manslaughter. Ellis would have been 24 now. He may have been to university, making a career for himself. He may have settled down, got married, and had children of his own. I may have been a gran. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I will never get over watching my son die a little every day. It took 13 years, 11 months, and 13 days after he was shaken for him to take his last breath. No one spoke of this inhumane life in court, nor the years of suffering my child would endure that would only end in death. Maybe this would have led to justice. Maybe a better understanding of this life of suffering will lead to justice for others in the future. Maybe this understanding could lead to prevention and higher consequence. I will always feel burdened by the beaded necklace that I wear, and I will never be able to take it off. Ellis is buried in a little churchyard under a tree, and all that I can do for him now is take him flowers. After 10 years since he passed, I still have the sudden maternal urge to go get Ellis in from the cold when it rains. Please support a better understanding, and please support Icon.
Thanks everyone for watching that. What we're going to do now is we've got a few questions. If you want any questions to ask May, she's here. And first of all, she just wants to bring you up to date with what's happening in her life. And I'm just going to hand you straight over to May. May, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you being here. It shows me that there are so many professionals who want to prevent babies being shaken in an area where Ellis spent half of his life. and where his body is now laid to rest, I feel truly humbled that this programme has come to this area. I moved Ellis from Leicester to Somerset after reading that the sea air helped poor immune systems. We lived in a house on the beach. For a while it improved Ellis's health. He was even able to attend school for a time. But when Ellis started to feel unwell again and his emergency admissions confirmed that he had reached his end of life and needed palliative care, I ended up signing a DNR, a do not resuscitate. He was 12 years old. We got married in a small church on Christmas Eve so Ellis could be at our wedding. Our honeymoon was at Charlton Farm Hospice. All the staff had decorated our room with balloons and banners. It meant so much. After nursing Ellis at home for almost another 18 months, he passed away at hospice 14 years ago, aged 14. This particularly difficult anniversary is on the 9th of May. There was a moment when I wanted to rush Ellis to hospital and do all that we could to save him, like we'd done so many times before. But in the end, I knew that we had to end his suffering. I followed the DNR. It was the hardest decision I have ever had to make. Ellis opened his eyes before his last breath, and then he was gone. I was left holding an empty body, the prison that had kept Ellis trapped for 14 years. The pained grimace on his face was gone. His frown was smooth. The tendons in his body that had held him too tightly had relaxed. His legs uncrossed. His thumbs had uncurled out of his now relaxed hands. His hunchback had loosened. His hips had unlocked. Ellis had unfurled. His milky, unseeing irises were covered by eyelids. He had no saliva to choke on, no sudden spasm to cry out at, no confusion or doubt. His face was free from oxygen tubes, and for the first time since Ellis was shaken, he was at peace. I will carry Ellis's tragedy with me forever. I want you to remember Ellis's story when you deliver Icon, so that his suffering can help other babies live, thrive, and be happy. Thank you.
Thanks, May. As always, so powerful. Does anybody have any questions for May?
I am welcome to answer any questions. You know, I don't want anyone to think they're putting me on the spot. So if anyone's got anything they want to ask, then please do.
May's going to be with you for the whole of the conference. So if you want to ask her something later on, if you just let Karen know or Nat know, and we can organize. Oh, we've got Lynn. Yeah. You've got your hand up.
It's not really a question, May, but you've just taken me into a world I needed to go to. Sorry, I don't want to get upset. But we support the lifetime nurses in across BNSSG, and you've really taken me to a place where I can think about what it's like for them to support parents, and helped me to connect with just how challenging it is for parents and how we need to reach out more to parents and understand them more. And your necklace of burden really made me think about the beads that professionals might add to those necklaces for parents. and how we need to make it a lot easier for them to access support from us. So thank you.
That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
I just mirror really what Lynn said there, May. That it's been an absolute honour to work with you, and I'm so grateful that you could come to this event today and share with us your story about Ellis.
Right, I'll think, May, if it's all right with you, I'm going to hand back to Karen now, and wish you a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you so much also to you, Sue, for coming along today. It's been fantastic. Thank you both. I think actually we're going into breakout rooms now. Nat, is that right? I think we've got, we're doing quite well actually. We're pretty much sticking to time. So we're all going to go into breakout rooms now, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about what's happening in our current practice regarding ICON. So, and May, you're gonna be here, aren't you? So that's fantastic. Perhaps join one of our breakout groups. That would be great.
Louise, if you can pause the recording and then I'll explain to people the breakout room and the activity, that would be great, please.